one of every four countries experiences a loss of erosion of women's rights. Gun ownership in Israel is on the rise. We are very afraid by the connection of domestic abusers and gun ownership.
Do you have maybe certain stories that really touched you or rocked you, that you want people to realize the gravity of what occurred?
What do you think that happened at the homes of the kibbutzim when the terrorists were there for hours and hours, most of them on drugs?
Welcome to the Poris podcast. I am thrilled today to introduce Tal Hochman, Executive Director of the Israel Women's Network, Israel's first and leading feminist organization fighting for gender equality since 1984. Under Tal's leadership, she transformed IWN into an activist think tank. She led a global petition calling for UN recognition of the organized sexual violence committed during Hamas's October 7th, 2023 attack. And now she's in the United States for a tour of high-profile events aimed at exposing the impacts of the ongoing war on Israeli women, families, and communities. Tal, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with the broad strokes. What are the biggest issues facing women and, in your experience, particularly Israeli women?
Ooh, where do I begin?
I know.
An easy question to begin.
You're right.
Okay, so I see, I'll talk about two trends. The first one is what's happening in the Israeli society, where we just hit 2 years after October 7. The aftermath of the war is still very evident in Israel right now. We have established the Alice line. It's called after the late Alice Shalvi, who funded us 40 years ago, IWN. And this Alice line pretty much helps women everywhere in Israel to exercise their rights with everything related to the war. So we have received thousands of calls from women, and we help them receive the benefits that they weren't able to receive on their own. But we were also able to detect macro level issues of problems that needed advocacy efforts to change policies into. So we have encountered dozens of reserve wives, for example, who are just like, collapsing after from the burden of war, where their husbands are in combat and they have to take care of their children 24/7. And another very interesting population that we've helped is that we're helping right now because it's an ongoing situation are the ex-wives of reserve. So ex-wives of reserves who have joint children with their ex-husband don't receive the same benefits and government subsidies that the wives of reserves receive, even though they are the sole give taker, the one taking care of the children 24/7 while the ex-husband is in reserve in combat. So they didn't receive the money or the babysitting money that they were supposed to receive from the government, and we've helped them change the policies into receiving those things. So the aftermath of the war is still very going on in Israel, and many women are losing their jobs or collapsing of the burden. PTSD is something that is very evident right now. Gun ownership in Israel is on the rise. We are very afraid by the connection of domestic abusers and gun ownership. So in general, I would say that all of these topics, the same commonality that they have is that gender is not a lens that this government uses. So we need to be the one advocating for gender issues and gender needs and women's needs because nobody else cares right now. One of the effects of that is that there are no women in leadership positions in Israel right now in the government, which makes our job much harder, but much more needed. And the other thing that I wanted to mention, the other trend is a global trend of the anti-feminist movement, which the UN Women Report of March 2025 said that one of every four countries experiences a loss of erosion of women's rights in their country. And we feel it very much in Israel. right now.
So, for lack of a better way to put this, to not to make this indelicate, because you did kind of speak to your role globally opposite the UN as well as in Israel. But what does that have to do with the price of tea in China? You know what I mean? Like what brings you to the United States? What are you hoping to get out of the meetings that you are having here? And you've already had 2 meetings in Boston. So how did you get did you get the reception that you were hoping for?
So it's not my first visit to the US as the CEO of Israel Women's Network. I feel an extreme bond between the feminists and the allies here at the US as to the feminist movement in Israel. I just came back from a conversation about how we, not to sound too arrogant, but we embody the democratic values of Israel. And I think this is a fight that is not only reserved to feminist Israelis, but also people who care about the democratic values of Israel as a whole globally. And that is why I think this conversation should be outside of Israel as it should be in Israel itself. And I've received a warm welcome. I'm so glad to be here. I will participate and take part of the GA of UJA federations next week, and I will be a part of the Illuminate convention around women's Jewish leadership next week as well in New York.
So you mentioned your Illuminate conference convening in New York on November 20th. And you said that you're leading on how Israeli women are reshaping discourse on resilience. With rising U.S. debates over campus protests and Gaza aid, is there a danger that highlighting Israeli victims' stories gets drowned out, or worse, politicized as one-sided by Western progressive circles?
I think that politicizing every issue is the most easy thing to do. And I think that the more that you delve into a topic, then you find out the complexities of it. We are an NGO that does advocacy. We spotlight the issues that the government should do better. This is our aim. This is what we were formed to do. And we talk about women's rights in Israel, but we also talk about women's rights globally. I think highlighting this as, the nonprofit field in Israel that is still thriving and does an amazing work, even though when sometimes we don't see eye to eye with our government or the policies. I think this is what should be highlighted. And if people want to, take it to one side or another, it's the easiest thing to do. I can't do anything about it, but I think these are the voices that should be heard.
So obviously, though, there have been a lot of politicizations, particularly regarding October 7th. I know that there was widespread condemnation, including from your organization, against the UN for ignoring their silence on what was happening in Israel post October 7th and on October 7th. And it took many months, I think over a year, before the UN finally came out with the report saying, yes, we do believe that there's conclusive evidence to suggest that Hamas conducted systematic use of rape and sexual violence as a weapon of war. Can you tell me a little bit about your efforts there, and how does that reflect the UN in general and the way that they operate? Do you see that kind of indifference often?
So October 7th happened. I was in Israel. The first thing that came up into the feminist WhatsApp groups were talking about sexual violence. It was clear to us that the time that the terrorists spent with the victims was enough time to conduct these sexual horrific acts. So on October 26th, the UN Women had issued a statement without a word about the sexual violence. I thought it was appalling and very troubling. Like, I kept asking myself, how could that be? I usually think the best of people. And then I read that statement and I was really didn't understand what happened. So the first thing that I do as an advocacy officer, I wrote a letter directed to UN Women, demanding their condemnation, and I spread it around. I was so happy to see the amount of signatures that were just added to the letter. More than 170 women's rights organizations from Israel, but also from around the world, signed that letter, and that was was the time for a sign of relief to see the amount of feminist allies that we have outside of Israel. And that letter, it was sent to the UN, and UN Women had a close conversation with us. I thought that what one of them said during that conversation was very interesting. She said how it was a mistake that they didn't do that, that they didn't condemn what happened, and that they thought on October 7th that they thought about their people on the ground in Gaza, and they forgot about their international mandate. And UN Women has an international mandate, but they have projects on the ground. They don't have a person in Israel at all. So I went and I did some digging. I tried to understand the connection that UN Women had with feminist organizations in Israel. And I found out that pretty much since 2014, they have, like, there was no connection at all. No relationships, no interpersonal connection. And I'm not saying that to exempt from what they did. I'm an action person, so I wanted things to be different. I wanted to change things.
Sure.
And after that conversation, I made it IWN's mission that they won't forget us, that they won't forget me, my face, my name, my history, where I come from. And I wish that October 7 will never happen again. But if something like that in that magnitude will happen, then will think of me. They will think about IWN and the feminist staff that we have. And ever since then, we started working with Ms. Pramila Patton, the head of CRSV at the UN that works closely with the Director General. And the experience with her and her team, that they are very professional, very expert at what they do, was a great experience. They came to Israel, we met with her. We sat with her team 4 hours, giving them all the information, we collected a lot of data, a lot of information, a lot of bits of stories and information that we were able to put together to understand the bigger picture of what happened on specific scenes of the crime scenes. So we had a lot of evidence to show them. And it was really meaningful for someone to take them and say, okay, we'll do the work with it. When the report was first issued, I think it was March 2024, yeah. and it was a lot. It was a lot for that time. So now we know much more, but for that time being, the report was very really depicted the picture of what we, the ones doing the actual work in Israel, felt that it depicted. So that was a good experience. I'm not going to say that there's no politicization in the UN, because there is, but I can't stop and complain about that. I have to think how we can shift the agenda and focus about, when we talked about conflict-related sexual violence, we talked about how this is something that it didn't happen only in Israel. It's not something that is unique. We are part of a global trend that is just more and more numbers of women, children, and men that have been affected by this. So putting this in a general and global perspective, I think really blocks all the negative things that they have to say or other people have to say about how, I don't know, it should have happened. I don't know what they
Sure.
say, but this is something that taking it out of the context is something that you can do when you talk about conflict-related sexual violence in Syria and in Ethiopia and everywhere else. And yeah.
Well, and that, I mean, yeah, I found it quite shocking that that it really did take so long. I mean, you're telling me that you had this relatively pleasant and um, productive conversation with the UN after they finally kind of came to meet. But I know that it was very shocking to a lot of people that there was really silence for a long, long time, and especially coming off of the Masa Amine, women life freedom protests, and that coming off of the back of Me Too, and believe all women until it comes to Israel, and this whole situation of even now. I was just recently in Amsterdam, and I actually went to a pro-Palestine, anti-Israel protest in Amsterdam, at their at the central train station, and I was
Just
talking
for
to
fun.
right, yeah, and I was talking to one of the protesters, and when it came to the situation of rape, she brought it up as an example of the propaganda, as the lie that Israel gives, that how they fabricate all this evidence like the rape. And I said, well, hold on, even the UN finally came out with a report saying it definitely happened. There's more than enough evidence to suggest that it happened. She says, no, no, no. And that's kind of what I'm still met with on the street, is that it, and I see this in the news too, right? Where first they say nothing or they say a lie, and then
Mhm.
they make a correction, but they bury it, or maybe they don't even correct it. Maybe they just take the story down quietly, and then they just let that lie simmer and go out there. And then it creates an environment where the voice of truth is just drowned out. How do you deal with that? How are you fighting that? Have you experienced that? I'll let you take it from there.
I think that this is one of the biggest problems that um, society globally is dealing right now. It's not just our case, or we see it on so many levels. We saw it in the conversation about conflict-related sexual violence, where you just talked about. Like, we still hear that. Um, Nobody was brave enough to say that to me. When there's something that when you hold the information yourself, you you become much stronger. So I'm just waiting for someone to be able to come to me and say, like, this didn't happen, and for
Right.
me to come and say, well, you have no idea the things that I've seen, and start talking about that. But we actually see it everywhere. We see it at the Knesset. We see that data is not important anymore. And as an advocacy organization, it's very complicated because we are based on data. We
Mm.
promote policies based on data. And when anyone else just, I don't know, throws a number or throws a saying and doesn't have anything to back that up, it's a problem for everyone because things are being promoted on, I don't know, agenda or the media that comes up the same day. It's very complicated, and it actually makes me fear democracy in general.
Interesting. Because yeah, I mean, I know that you've. Speaking of data, I know that you were critical of the Israeli government as well for not collecting enough evidence at the time, shortly after October 7th. And of course, it was fog of war, it was chaos. A lot of people on the ground were not trained really to collect that kind of
Right.
evidence. It was messy, and so it can be forgiven to a degree that some data was not collected, but obviously, some people wanted to protect the dignity of the victims, and so they kind of hid things or swept it under the rug in a sense, or polluted the scene, or contaminated the scene, and there was a big mess. Um, how did you navigate collecting evidence in a standardized way that you can really stand on despite those challenges? And has the government kind of come back around to support you in that sense?
Okay, so first of all, the sense is that the fog of war is still happening in Israel. So nobody has come to us from the Israeli government asking to see what we've collected, um, compared to Pramila Patten that sat with us and her team did. Um, I was, I'm a trained social worker. So, on October 7, I was like I wasn't able to do anything. But a few days after, everyone around me and myself just started asking ourselves, like, what can we do? Everyone, I live in Tel Aviv, so you just stepped outside. Everyone's carrying, packages to bring to evacuees. There was no one just like sitting at home taking care of himself. And I'm a social worker by training, so I went to the Shura base. It's a place where they brought all the bodies to. And I witnessed firsthand the fog of war, or the after effect of another catastrophe. It was terrible to watch, to see how not organized we were as a country to this catastrophe. Nobody really planned it, but as a country that is constantly at war, I would have expected for it to look something different. And you're right. Like, people who have done amazingly collecting evidence and collecting the bodies on the ground. I don't criticize their work whatsoever, but they did change the scenes, or they did take photos of things, and after changing or after covering the bodies because they thought it's immodest, or whatever they thought, which is okay because they weren't instructed to do anything else.
Yeah.
And that was the main criticism. They weren't instructed. Nobody even anticipated conflict-related sexual violence as to be part of the war in Israel, which is crazy,
for
right?
me, it's not even that. It's really just preserving the scene as a crime in general. Like, you take pictures first, no matter what the scene, and collect evidence no matter what's going on, and because how can you expect conflict-related sexual violence, or anything really? You preserve the evidence as best as you can in order for an investigation to be done, no matter where that leads, is what I would have expected.
Yeah, but it's complicated, right? Because they were under fire, and
Yeah.
they treated it as a terror scene, which is completely different in Israel. And in Israel, there is, you know who's the terrorist, you know who died, who was killed, and you collect whatever there is, but you don't need to investigate after that. Not too much, I would say. And here the situation was completely different, and the way that the government was unprepared to begin with, but then after the fact wasn't that interested in collecting evidence, which was very difficult to collect. And we know that they have to change the law to prosecute the terrorists, because in Israel, the Israeli law pretty much makes you to like put a connection between the terrorist who did the offense, not just the terrorist, but who did the offense, and what the offense was, and who was the victim. And obviously, October 7 is not something that you can draw the lines into it. So you have to change the law to prosecute these terrorists, and you have to talk about collectivity and how they did that as a group. And I felt that most of the time the Israeli government is not interested in hearing the voices of NGOs and who were on the ground and experienced things. And yeah, a lot of the stories were collected, and some of them are out, some of them are not, which we totally respect the families and what they want to do. And that is the situation right now.
Were you surprised by that response from the government, that the sort of brushing you away of NGOs and other organizations that were trying to elicit any sort of response, or can you kind of forgive it? Again, for lack of a better word that comes to mind, can you kind of understand where they're saying, we have better things to worry about right now, if that's what they were saying at all?
So I am forgiveness, right? Like, I do have forgiveness. I if that was the case, then I would say, okay, like the war just started. We are in a national crisis. Like
Right.
I'm not, I can't see what's happening. But this is not the case. We are in November of 2025. It
Right.
has been 2 years since the war has started, since October 7, and I don't see a shift
Mm.
in the way that the government has I don't know, operated with relations to NGOs, and specifically feminist NGOs. There are government ministries and government officials that are doing an amazing job, really professionals that we are able to work with. But the policy, like the agenda in general, is very difficult.
I see, and this is it. Like I'm hearing what you're saying, and the first thing that comes to mind, aside from everything that was going on in Israel, because I was also in Israel on October 7th. Aside from that, I'm thinking the first thing that jumps up to my mind is the UK and like the rape scandals and things like this, where there's a government kind of indifference or a willingness to ignore it for I don't know why. Is it whether it's optics or because they're busy or because they might be implicated or because they didn't do a good job and they don't really want the attention that they didn't do a good job. And then I'm also now thinking of many of the other conflicts that are going around the world in Congo, Sudan, Tigray, Somalia, where there's widespread sexual violence. And is there enough attention being is there enough spotlight on these issues in your opinion?
Definitely not. I think, I think trying to put the polarization aside of the conflict. I think that every country that has experienced conflict-related sexual violence in these magnitudes feels alone. I see what's happening, as you mentioned, around the world, and it's not like all women or all people stand with the victims. It's sometimes it's not even heard of at the other side of the world. It's it You can exempt that by, each country has its own issues and everyone's dealing with a lot. But at the end of the day, we as feminists have to stick together and we have to have alliances. And if something happens to a woman at the other side of the world, I care about it deeply because this affects me. And we should raise our voices, each, like every person, not every woman, every person should raise their voice about what's happening on the other side of the world. And sometimes it doesn't happen.
What what sort of active response are you looking for? Are you hoping for from the average person, or are you really looking more towards governments and NGOs and larger organizations? Because like you said, it comes down to a point where how many issues can I worry about day to day when I'm trying to put food on the table and pick up my kid from school and go about whatever it is that they're doing. And that's not to minimize the issues that we're discussing, not at all. It's just to say that there are so many issues in so many places. How do you fit this into somebody's life in such a way that they can contribute meaningfully without being overwhelmed by the sheer number of issues that are going on?
So you can do a lot as a individual person, but also if you're part of a community. I'll
Mm-hmm.
give you two examples. The
Yeah.
first one is that at the beginning of the war of Ukraine and Russia, um, as mentioned before, I'm a social worker by training. I don't practice it by day, but I had a delegation that was out, like left Israel to the border of Poland and Ukraine, and we were there helping women cross the border. So because all of the men just stayed in Ukraine because they weren't able to leave,
Yeah.
so the women were traveling alone by themselves, sometimes with children, and sometimes with older parents, and there were some of them were targeted into sex trafficking. And so we were there at the border, helping them to cross, making sure that they have somewhere to go. Poland made many efforts to help people that fled Ukraine. So we were able to connect these people to the resources that Poland had. And that is not something that I did as an NGO. That is something that I did as a personal person that wasn't able to just sit at my home and see what's happening, and not at the other side of the world, but a few thousand miles from me.
Right.
And I couldn't accept it. So I
Sure.
stand up and I did something. And the other thing is that after the fog of war has ended, we kept asking ourselves, what would have helped us? What kind of a hand reached out to us
Right.
would made a significant for us? So, organizations that do have an expertise in conflict-related sexual violence, they have toolkits. They know what to do. Like if I knew on October 7, what were the 10 steps, the first 10 steps that I should go and make sure that happened, even in Shua as a social worker, but also as an advocacy organization that can come to the government and say, these things, these steps should happen right now today. This has could have changed the picture, definitely. But because this is not something that we have experienced in the past, it's something that shook us all. And I wasn't aware of these steps, but now I can share them with my allies from outside of Israel if needed.
Do you think that, coming back to maybe some of the politicized natures of some of these reports, because we have the reports that came out of Israel, we had the reports that finally came from the UN about October 7th, but then you also had reports from I think it was Amnesty or certain organizations that put out these things about how Israel was committing widespread sexual war crimes against the Palestinians because of limitations on Palestinian life, and therefore there was more domestic violence in the Palestinian home, and that's Israel's fault. And there was an attack that caused a bunch of embryos to be lost, and therefore it's a war crime against population control in the Palestinians and this and that. And I just see these are things that I think are very, very, very nitpicky, even if you want to take them very seriously, that lessen to a degree the legitimacy of other reports. How would you respond?
I think that these organizations are in a tough spot, that I don't know if they created, but they're in right now. I know that some of them wanted to issue a report about what happened in Israel, and I don't know why the reports weren't public yet, but I think that talking about something that happened somewhere on the other side, if you will, it doesn't demise what happened to you. And I'm not the one to give out grades and say, this is more important, this is terrible than this. I know what happened in Israel on October 7, and this is what I can talk about. To talk about what happened in Gaza or what happens on the West Bank I think, is eligible. You can talk about that. You can criticize the things that IDF does if if there's data behind it, if it has base to begin with. But I can talk about what I know, and I think more of us should stick about that.
Yeah. So I think it. I don't know. It may be crass, but if I ask you to maybe share some of the evidence that you did collect for the sake of posterity, for the sake of having something to say that the data is not just numbers; these are real stories. Do you have maybe certain stories that really touched you or rocked you that you want people to realize that the gravity of what occurred?
I think anyone who have watched videos from October 7th, from the Nova Festival, and really watched them, there were so many, both from the young people fleeing the scene, but also first responders who came to the scene and they took videos of what happened. And you see the way that the bodies were left, and you see how they were undressed. And there were, unfortunately, so many stories from the Nobel Festival that have conflict-related sexual violence connected to it. It's very difficult to talk about a specific case or about a specific person, and it's extremely important for me to not share information that someone is not willing to share. But as like talking to every woman that is out there, you all know how deeply embedded it is in us that it's scary to walk during the night in the street, and it's scary to do, I don't know, to ride on the subway. And what do you think that happened at the homes of the kibbutzim when the terrorists were there for hours and hours and hours, most of them on drugs, doing terrible things. And so how can you not think, from all you know, that happens to women during wartime, how can you not think that this was a part of the attack?
So, what's maybe a more positive message, I guess, to leave us with? Like, what's like a call to action that you would want people to take away from what you're saying here today? Something, again, that the everyman or every woman at home can embody in their day to day, or if there's maybe a message of how people can protect themselves in a sense when they are on the subway or walking home.
So, if it's okay, I'm going to take this question and talk about the day after the war in Israel.
Please, yeah.
So people tell us that the war has ended, even though we're not that sure. My husband still has reserve duty next week, and he has to go. And we are still in the state of women carry the burden of war, but also men coming back from combat, most of them. As I mentioned at the beginning, many firearms are being distributed in the civil arena in Israel. Pretty much every second person carries a gun, and things will look different. The question that I think is the most important one is, in the stage of the day after the war of rebuilding Israel, where are the women? Because we know that they are not around the decision-making table. We know that women are not in leadership positions right now in Israel, that they can't voice the needs of women. This is what we have to do. We have to share the stories, share the voices of these women that we're helping, but also make a gender lens to the policies that are already out there, that are not subjected or focused on feminist issues or women's rights, or we're talking about rehabilitation of Israel as a whole. So women should be part of the conversation, should be part of policies. And I think that is something that everyone who is connected to Israel on some level, either if it's by donating, either with helping or coming or having family there, this is something that we all should think about, because women are 50% of the population in Israel, even more. And we have to make sure that our needs as women are being brought to the table and really shape and change policies.
All right. Tal Hochman, Executive Director of the Israel Women's Network, thank you again so much for joining me, and best of luck on your United States tour. I know that you have another number of stops to make, so stay safe. And now to those, of course, watching and tuning in, if you enjoyed this interview, please don't just watch, join the conversation, comment, like, share. Make sure that you're subscribed to the Poris podcast for more amazing conversations like this one with Tal. It helps the channel grow and to bring you more amazing content. Tal, again, thank you so much. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you, and thank you for all you do, really.
It's my pleasure. All right, take care.